Dalton Keane believed he was opening the door to solitude and a second chance, not to a pair of defiant green eyes that would upend everything he thought he knew about loss, justice, and courage. He had 30 seconds to decide whether he was the kind of man who walked away or the kind who stood his ground. And fate did not intend to give him more time than that. By the time the morning sun finished climbing the pines, his new life would already be burning. The morning light spilled long, slanted shadows through the tall pines as Dalton guided his wagon up the narrow, winding trail, the wooden wheels groaning in protest as if they, too, understood the weight of what this journey meant. He had bought the cabin site unseen, trading the last of his savings for a promise written on a folded deed that rested against his chest inside his vest. 3 months earlier, creditors had stripped him of his ranch piece by piece, leaving him with nothing but debts, grief, and the bitter memory of his brother's grave. This isolated cabin, hidden deep in the frontier hills, was meant to be his restart, a place where no one knew his failures and no one could take anything else from him. His weathered hands tightened on the reins as the cabin finally came into view. A small, sturdy structure crouched among the trees as though it had grown there. Relief flickered through him for exactly one breath, and then his stomach dropped. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, thin and gray against the blue morning sky. Someone was inside. Someone was burning his wood, sleeping under his roof, claiming what little he had left in the world. He reined the horses to a stop and sat there for a moment, jaw clenched, anger and dread tangling together in his chest. Every dollar he owned was tied up in that cabin. Every scrap of hope he had salvaged after losing his land. He climbed down from the wagon, boots crunching on gravel, and straightened his shoulders, as if bracing for a fight he had known was coming his entire life. The door was worn but solid beneath his palm, the kind of craftsmanship you didn't see much anymore. And through the single dusty window he caught a glimpse of movement inside. Whoever had decided to take shelter here was about to learn that Dalton Keane was done being pushed aside. Without knocking, he shoved the door open and stepped across the threshold. Instead of the filth and disarray he had expected, he found a space that was clean, cared for, and unexpectedly gentle. A jar of wildflowers sat on the rough-hewn table, their colors bright against the plain wood, and the air carried the warm, comforting scent of fresh bread. The surprise slowed him for half a step, but what truly stopped him cold was the woman standing near the fireplace. Sunlight caught in her long auburn hair as she turned, illuminating a face that was striking enough to steal a man's breath. Yet it was her eyes that held him, green and sharp with a defiance that promised she would not be easily cowed. She wore a simple blue dress, mended and worn but clean, and she stood with a dignity that made it clear she did not see herself as a thief. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice steady despite the flicker of surprise that had crossed her face. "I've been expecting you." Dalton removed his hat without quite understanding why respect came so naturally in that moment. "Ma'am, I'm Dalton Keane. I bought this place fair and legal, and I have the papers to prove it." She nodded slowly as if his words confirmed something she already knew. "I'm Cora Lane, and before you tell me to leave, you should know that I can't." The yuck certainty in her tone sent an unease through him that had nothing to do with property lines or trespassing. This was not a woman scrambling for shelter. This was someone cornered by something far larger. Dalton set his hat on the table, forcing his voice to remain level. "Miss Lane, whatever arrangement you had with the previous owner is no longer valid. I paid for this cabin with money I couldn't afford to lose." Cora stepped away from the fire, folding her hands in front of her. "I understand your position, Mr. Keane, but there are things about this place you don't know yet. Things that change everything." Dalton pulled the deed from his vest and laid it flat on the table between them. "I've heard every kind of story a desperate person can tell, and I've lost more than most." A flicker crossed her eyes, not fear, but something like sympathy. "I don't doubt that," she said softly, "but this isn't about money or paper. It's about survival." He studied her face, searching for deceit, but found none. Her clothes were tidy, her hair neatly braided, and the cabin bore the marks of someone who cared, who treated this place like a home. Survival for who, he asked, his edge dulled by curiosity he hadn't intended to feel. Before she could answer, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the quiet like a blade. Fast, heavy, more than one rider. Both of them froze. Color drained from Cora's face as she moved to the window, staying just out of sight. How many people knew you were coming today, she whispered, the calm she had worn earlier shattering. Nobody, Dalton replied, joining her. I kept it quiet. Through the trees he saw 3 men riding hard up the trail, their posture purposeful, their spacing tight. These were not wanderers. You know them, he said. Her hands trembled on the frame. I was praying they'd never find this place. The lead rider was tall, broad-shouldered, with a black beard and a gun belt worn smooth by use, flanked by 2 men who moved like trained hounds. Miss Lane, Dalton said quietly, what exactly are you hiding from? She turned, and the defiance finally cracked, revealing raw fear beneath. My husband, she said, or rather the man who claims to own me. The words hit him harder than he expected. A runaway wife complicated everything, but the terror in her eyes told him this was no ordinary domestic quarrel. He doesn't accept no, Cora continued, and he has means most men don't. The hoofbeats thundered closer. Dalton found himself stepping between her and the door, an instinctive move that surprised him even as he did it. Minutes ago he had been ready to throw her out. Now the thought felt wrong. They're here, she breathed. Neither of them knew that the man leading, those riders, had been hunting her for weeks, or that he had no intention of leaving empty-handed. The horses pulled up hard, leather creaking as the men dismounted, spurs ringing against the porch boards. Stay behind me, Dalton murmured, aware of how quickly his priorities had shifted. A heavy knock shook the door. Open up. We know you're in there. Cora. The voice was rough with authority, used to being obeyed. Dalton felt her fear like a living thing in the small space. What do you want me to say? He whispered. Nothing, she said. Don't let them know you've seen me. The door opened anyway, and the 3 men stepped inside without invitation. The leader's gaze swept the room and locked instantly on Cora. A cold smile spread across his face. There you are. You've caused a lot of trouble. Dalton moved to block him. This is private property. You're trespassing. The man looked him over like a butcher judging meat. Marcus Webb. That woman is my wife, and she's coming home. I'm not your wife, Cora said, her voice steadying. That ceremony was forced. The law says otherwise, Marcus replied lightly. And the law is what counts out here. Dalton felt the weight of his gun, but knew the odds. She doesn't want to go, he said. She doesn't get a choice, Marcus answered, like he was discussing livestock. The cruelty in his tone made Dalton's jaw tighten. No one belongs to anyone else. One of the men shifted closer. We can take her, boss. Marcus raised a hand, eyes never leaving Dalton. Walk away and nobody gets hurt. Family business isn't your concern. Dalton felt Cora trembling behind him, but she stood her ground. I bought this cabin legally, he said. She's my guest. That makes it my concern. Marcus's expression darkened. How long have you known my wife, cowboy? The implication was a threat. Long enough to know she's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go. Marcus nodded, decision settling in his eyes. Burn it down, he said calmly. The words struck Dalton like a blow. The thin man moved for the fire, grabbing a burning log. This was no longer about land. You do that and you ruin me, Dalton said, hand drifting toward his gun. Should have stayed out of it, Marcus replied. The third man leveled his weapon at Dalton's chest. Step aside. Dalton's mind raced, but then Cora spoke. Let me go, don't lose everything because of me. When he looked back, he saw her hands pressed to her stomach, and understanding hit him like lightning. No, he said. She stays. Marcus followed his gaze, and his smile twisted into something murderous. You think that child is yours? The accusation poisoned the air. It isn't his, Cora said, and it isn't yours either. You know that. Rage flushed Marcus's face. Everything about you is mine. Dalton felt something harden inside him. He had already lost nearly everything. He would not lose himself. She's not going, he said, ending it. The thin man laughed at the odds. Marcus studied Dalton, then smiled without warmth. One gun, fair fight. You win, I leave her alone. If I win, he continued, she comes with me and you die here. Cora stepped forward. Don't do this for me. You don't know me. Dalton thought of her courage, of the child she carried, and knew enough. Marcus mocked the idea of courage, of discipline, of ownership, and Dalton saw the truth of him. You're afraid to face me alone, Dalton said, baiting him. Marcus's men stepped back at his signal. As they moved outside, Cora grabbed Dalton's arm and warned him of Marcus's speed and his past killings. Dalton asked the truth, and she gave it of a father's debt, of a forced marriage, of a good man who had died before knowing she carried his child. of Marcus claiming that child as his own. Understanding settled over Dalton like armor. From outside, Marcus called for him to come. As Dalton turned, Cora whispered the final truth, the one that froze his blood. Marcus Webb killed your brother. The world narrowed to a point as she explained how she had overheard. Marcus boasting of murdering a rancher on the North Trail, describing the scar on Samuel Keane's hand. Dalton asked if she was certain, and she told him about the watch, the one with the carved initials. Rage and clarity fused into something unbreakable as Dalton stepped outside, facing the man who had shattered his family, knowing there would be no turning back now. Dalton stepped into the clearing with the certainty of a man who had already lost everything that could be taken from him. His boots crunching against the dry earth as Marcus Webb waited 20 paces away, relaxed, confident, a predator certain of his kill. The two remaining men lingered near the porch, watching with thin smiles, already imagining how this would end. Dalton's hands were steady at his sides, but his chest burned with a fury he had never known, a fury sharpened by grief and given purpose by truth. "Before we start," Dalton called out, his voice carrying clearly through the trees. "Tell me about Samuel Keane." Marcus's confident expression faltered for the briefest instant before smoothing back into a grin. "Never heard of him?" "Rancher on the North Trail. 6 months back," Dalton pressed. "The one who wouldn't sell his water rights." Marcus's grin widened, genuine now, the mask gone completely. "Oh, that fool. Stubborn as a mule. Thought principles were worth more than his life." The words slammed into Dalton, confirming what his heart already knew. "He was my brother." Marcus's eyes lit with something close to delight. "Then this is perfect. I get to finish what I started." The clearing seemed to tighten around them, the forest holding its breath. Dalton heard Samuel's voice in his memory, remembered long afternoons practicing with tin cans, his brother's calm patience as he taught him to aim true and stand firm. "On 3, Marcus said lightly. 1. Dalton's world narrowed to the man before him, every sense sharpened. 2. Time stretched thin as both hands moved. 3. Gunfire shattered the morning. Marcus was fast, faster than most men Dalton had faced. But rage and righteousness drove Dalton's reflexes beyond fear. Smoke drifted as Marcus Webb crumpled into the dirt, his gun still half drawn, his confidence finally gone. Dalton stood over him for a heartbeat, chest heaving, justice ringing loud in his ears, then boots scraped behind him. The thin man had his gun leveled at Dalton's chest, his smile gone, replaced by cold calculation. "Boss might be dead, but you still killed him. That makes you a dead man too." Dalton felt the hollow click of his empty chamber, knew he didn't have time to reload as the two men advanced, savoring the moment. "Should have walked away, cowboy," the third man sneered. Before either could fire, a rifle cracked from the cabin doorway. The thin man spun and fell, clutching his shoulder, screaming. Cora stood framed by the door, rifle braced against her shoulder, her face calm and resolute. "The next shot won't be a warning," she said evenly. The remaining gunman hesitated just long enough. Dalton dove, rolling behind Marcus's fallen body, reloading with hands that moved on instinct. When he came up firing, the last man was already scrambling for his horse, panic replacing bravado. Dalton let him run. One witness might be enough. Silence settled, broken only by labored breathing and the soft creak of the cabin. Cora lowered the rifle and walked to Marcus's body, looking down at the man who had ruled her life through fear. Dalton expected triumph or relief, but saw only weariness. "It's over," she said quietly. Dalton knelt, something nagging at him. "You said he kept my brother's watch." She nodded. "He wore it like a trophy." Dalton searched Marcus's vest and found it, the familiar silver warm in his palm. Memories surged as he opened it, but inside, tucked behind the face, was a folded paper. He opened it carefully, revealing a hand-drawn map marked in Samuel's handwriting. A note at the bottom reading, "For my brother Dalton, if anything happens to me." Understanding struck him hard. Samuel had known. He hid this knowing I'd find it. Cora leaned closer. "What is it?" "Evidence," Dalton said, whatever Samuel was gathering. Before he could say more, hoofbeats sounded again, many this time urgent. "The man who fled must have gone for help," Cora said. But as the riders emerged, Dalton saw the badge glinting on the lead man's chest. "Sheriff Morrison," Cora whispered. "He's been looking for me." Dalton looked from Marcus's body to the rifle in, Cora's hands and the map in his own. 30 seconds from now, he'd be explaining everything. The sheriff dismounted slowly, eyes taking in the scene. Miss Lane, he said carefully, Marcus Webb reported you were kidnapped. Cora stepped forward, voice clear and unwavering. Marcus Webb forced me into marriage to settle my father's medical debts. When he discovered I was pregnant with another man's child, he became violent. I ran to protect my baby, and Marcus Webb murdered my brother Samuel. Dalton added, holding up the watch. He kept this. Miss Lane heard him brag about it. The sheriff examined the watch, recognition dawning. I remember this. Samuel never took it off. He tried to burn my cabin and threatened to kill her and the child, Dalton continued. I challenged him to a fair fight. He accepted. The wounded man tried to shout his own story, but Cora returned with papers. The extortion laid bare in Marcus's own hand. The sheriff's face hardened. These aren't marriage documents. These are crimes. The fleeing gunman was captured before he reached the trees. Dalton unfolded Samuel's map and explained. 3 days later, they found the evidence Samuel had hidden. Records of theft, murder, corruption. Marcus Webb's empire collapsed. Cora's marriage was declared invalid, her future secured. Months later, Dalton stood on the porch of his rebuilt cabin, watching Cora hang laundry, her pregnancy rounding her form. The baby kicked, she said, smiling. Dalton felt a peace he hadn't known since before Samuel died. Have you chosen a name? He asked. Samuel, she said softly. Dalton nodded, knowing his brother would have approved. Some purchases, he realized, were worth far more than they cost. 6 months had a way of reshaping the land as surely as it reshaped people, and the cabin, that once stood half forgotten, among the pines now bore the marks of renewal, fresh-hewn boards catching the sun, a stronger roof set against winter storms, and a porch wide enough to watch a future unfold. Dalton Keane stood there in the early morning light, the air cool and clean, listening to the quiet sounds of a place that finally felt like home. Below him, the valley rolled out in soft greens and browns, no longer a reminder of everything he had lost, but a promise of what could still be built. He leaned against the porch post, watching Cora move through the yard with a basket of laundry balanced against her hip, her steps careful but unbroken, her free hand resting instinctively on the curve of her belly. Time had softened the sharp edges of fear in her eyes, replacing them with a calm strength that came from safety hard-won. The past still lived with them in memory and scars, but it no longer ruled their days. Cora paused, catching Dalton watching her, and smiled, a simple thing that still surprised him with how deeply it settled into his chest. The baby kicked again this morning, she said, her voice carrying easily in the open air. Strong like his uncle, Dalton replied, and felt the weight of Samuel's name not as a wound this time, but as an anchor. The weeks after Marcus Webb's death had been heavy with questions, statements, and long rides into town. But the truth Samuel had hidden had cut through lies that had protected men like Marcus for years. Ranchers who had lived in fear began to speak. Families who had lost land or loved ones finally had names to give the law. Sheriff Morrison had aged a decade and a month as the scope of the crimes unfolded, but he had stood firm and the territory was cleaner for it. Cora's forced marriage had been erased by the court, the ink barely dry before it was declared a crime itself, and the seized estate had provided her with something she had never known before: choice. Yet she stayed. When Dalton had told her she was free to go anywhere she wished, she had only looked around at the cabin, at the trees, at him, and said quietly that freedom meant little if you didn't know where you belonged. Dalton had understood that better than he ever expected to understand anyone. He thought often of the moment he had pushed open that door, expecting emptiness and found instead a life, intertwined with his own in ways he could never have planned. He had come here to hide from loss, to lick wounds and survive alone, but the frontier had a way of giving a man exactly what he needed, not what he asked for. Cora finished hanging the last shirt and made her way up the steps, easing herself onto the bench beside him. For a while they sat in companionable silence, the kind that came from shared truth rather than absence of words. Have you thought more about the future? Dalton asked, his gaze still on the horizon. She nodded, her hand never leaving her stomach. I want this child to grow up knowing what it means to stand up for others. To know that blood doesn't make a family, choices do. Dalton swallowed, feeling the quiet weight of what she was offering without ever saying it outright. He thought of Samuel again, of the way his brother had lived, stubbornly honest, willing to pay the price for doing what was right. And he knew that legacy deserved to live on, not just in a name but in action. The wind moved through the pines, carrying with it the scent of earth and possibility, and Dalton realized that the cabin, the land, even the justice he had found were only parts of a larger gift. Some purchases, he reflected, cost you everything you have, and then give back more than you believed the world still held. He looked at Cora, at the life growing within her, and felt certain that whatever storms came next, they would be faced together, not as owner and trespasser, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two people who had chosen, against all odds, to build something better from the ashes of what had been burned away.